Fellow spirits, let's guide our villagers to heal and grow in this highly interactive game of Arborea.
And today we'll be teaching you how to play Arborea, game designed by Danny Garcia and published by Alleycat Games.
And hello everyone, it's Stella.
And Taryn from Meeple University.
Alright, let's go to the classroom.
In Arborea, players are patron spirits, attempting to rebuild the landscape of Arborea for its creatures. Players will take actions to gather collective resources, spend them from the pool to build ecosystems, and strategically place their own ecosystems and creatures for points. When the sun track reaches its end, the player who has gathered the most points will be the winner. I won't be taking you step by step through setup, but I'll show you what the board looks like after setup and introduce you to some of the components. One thing that's helpful to know from the start is that this game has a lot of shared incentives, markets and resources. That is, players will frequently be interacting with the same sets of resources. Here at the top of the board, for example, are the creatures and the creature markets, which players will collectively be adding and then taking creatures to and from. Linked directly to the creature market is the sun track, and you'll place a marker at your player count, which will track the length of the game. Nearby are the shuffled ecosystem decks, ranked from cheapest to most expensive to complete. In the bottom left of the board are the biome tracks, and again this is a shared market. Players will be gaining resources into this pool, which all players will be able to spend. Nearby there are two personal tracks. The season track, where players will have endgame scoring objectives they can try to chase, and the spirit track. Spirit is a resource which players can gain or lose. Your starting spirit depends on your position in starting turn order. The turn sequence is described here, and the player's score is tracked around the outside of the board. In the middle of the board are the paths and the trails, and this is where the core of your actions will take place. You'll be placing meeples on the paths, moving the paths, and then stepping off and taking actions along the trails. There are 8 clusters of these trails, and each has an associated sage. Each player begins with a player board, 8 gift cubes, and 8 meeples. The 2 large black printed meeples are known as elders, and they begin in your supply. The 3 smaller black printed meeples are called young villagers, and the 3 smaller white printed meeples are called veteran villagers. The young and veteran villagers each have a separate area called the reserve. And to begin with, place all 3 into the respective reserves. Then in a 3, 4 or 5 player game, you'll advance 1 young villager into the supply, or in a 2 player game, advance 1 veteran villager. Deal each player 1 of the double-sided starter cards. This is placed face up to begin the player's habitat. And give each player 1 random red ecosystem card. You can look at your own ecosystem cards to plan how you'll later add them to your habitat, but you may leave them face down so no other players may see them. Choose a first player, and then in reverse turn order, each player does the following steps. First, choose any 1 meeple from your supply. Place it onto the placement space of any one of the 4 paths, and then advance that path. Ignore any icons that you place your meeples on during this step of setup. You can step off a path and onto a trail after this advancement, but more on that later. You're now ready to play. Arborea is played in turns, going clockwise around the table, and each of your turns will take place in these 4 steps. First, move path or place meeple. Second, resolve actions. Thirdly, complete an ecosystem card. And finally, clean up for the next round. Of these steps, the first and fourth are mandatory, the other 2 are optional. Now, to make the most sense of these, I'm going to explain them in a bit of an unusual order, but I'll come back at the end to put the whole thing into context. The first thing we need to understand is how meeples, paths, and trails work. This icon here allows you to place 1 meeple. And when you gain this icon, If you have any meeples available in your supply, not your reserves, then choose any one of those meeples and place it onto an unoccupied meeple placement space on one of the 4 paths. This is always the 4th square from the outside of the board. If the space is occupied, you cannot choose it. If you place your meeple on a season icon, then go to the bottom of the board and advance your cube on the matching season track. Each of these is seeded with an end of game scoring objective during setup, and so you'll be increasing your multiplier for that objective. An icon like this one allows you to advance a path. In step 1 of your turn, you can advance any one of the 4 paths by exactly 1 space, meaning you push these cardboard pieces 1 square towards the center of the board, moving along any meeples on that path. In step 4 of your turn, you must advance all paths containing any of your meeples by 1 step for each of your black printed meeples and 2 steps for each of your white printed meeples. Resolve this from top left to bottom right. So here I'd move this path 1 step, then this path 2 steps, then this path 2 steps. Immediately after a path has moved, and at no other time, meeples have the chance to jump off a path and onto these spaces, which are the starting spaces of trails. This should be resolved from the front of the queue to the back of the queue. So after this movement, blue would have the opportunity to jump off, then yellow, then blue again. If you choose to jump off, you can go to any trail entrance which is either adjacent to the meeple or further back along the path. For example, I could jump down to here. It is allowable for multiple meeples to occupy the same trailhead. If a path is pushed off the end of the spaces available for it, you'll see this icon. All of the meeples who are on the front part of that path must now jump off in order from front to back, and that step of the path is returned in its same orientation to the beginning of the path. Each of these trailheads shows the Meeple lightning bolt icon. This is the icon for taking actions along a trail, and in the second step of your turn, you may do this 2 up to 3 times. Anytime you take trail actions, choose any one of your meeples which is currently on a trailhead, not one which is on a path, and then move it along that trail, resolving the action for each icon you pass until you reach the end of the trail. This last icon is the same for all trails. It returns the meeple to your player board. And when you return your large meeples, they go back to your supply for immediate reuse, while if you return either colour of small meeple, they go back into the reserve and cannot be used again until they're moved to the supply. So let's now go back and have a look at the turn sequence once again. As the first step of your turn, you must either advance any one of the 4 paths or place a meeple from your supply on a path. You must choose one of these 2 options, and then you can choose to spend spirit, either 2 in a 2-player game, or 3 in a 3, 4, or 5-player game, to do it again, and you can choose to take the same or a different option to the first time. You may only resolve this extra step once per turn. Then you may resolve 0, 1, or 2 trail actions with meeples on trailheads, and you may spend 2 spirit to resolve a third. You then resolve step 3 and the first half of step 4, which we'll talk about later, and then you must advance every path containing one of your meeples. The important implication is that the actions get better the further your meeple advances on the path. There are generally more actions and better actions the further you go along. Therefore, you'll generally want to jump on a path and let it advance as much as possible before jumping off. However, you can only jump off immediately after an advancement. That means if you're expecting one of your opponents to give you an advancement on the track and they don't, then your meeple may be stranded on a path and not on the trailhead at the start of your turn. This is where if you really need to get that meeple to a trailhead by step 2 of your turn, you may have to move on step 1 rather than placing a new meeple. This trade-off is the core of the risk, reward, and interaction which players will have on the paths. So now, let's have a look at all of the game's actions and effects. And do note, this is going to include both the actions on the trails and some actions which appear in other locations. And I'll be introducing these as we go along. The first action is to gain biomes. These are the shared resources you'll find in the bottom left corner of the board. And in each case, the icon for the action matches the icon for the biome. These are found grouped together around the trails: trees, coral, flowers, weed, mushrooms, and water. You'll tend to get more the stronger your action is. Here, yellow's action would only gain 1 tree, purple's would gain 3. For each biome that you gain, advance the top half only of that biome's marker by 1 step. So for purple's action of gaining 3 trees, you would advance the marker like so. In phase 4 of your turn, as indicated by this icon, if you have not yet spent the biomes that you just gained, then advance the lower half of the marker to join the upper half and gain points for each of these numbers you cover. In this case, I would have gained 3 plus 3 plus 2 points for a total of 8. If you spend any biomes which you gained on your turn, then move that top half marker back down 1 step for each biome spent. What I just showed was spending 2 coral. If you spend biomes which were already available at the start of your turn, then push both halves of the marker down. This was spending 1 flower. You can also do a combination. If I spent 2 weeds right now, it would be 1, 2. Whatever you do, when you reach step 4 of your turn, you still advance all bottom halves to meet their top halves and gain any points you cover or cross. All of this comes with many implications. You can spend a lot of time increasing the available biomes and gaining good points for it, although this is a market-based economy and the points will decline the more available. But it's also the case that if you really need a certain type of biome to take an action, then you have the first right to spend those after gaining them, but you forego the potential points earned. Finally, the most valuable of the biomes by points is water. When taking an action to spend biomes, water may be spent in place of any other biome which is not currently available in the market. These purple and red icons are to gain or lose spirit on the spirit track. And in particular, you can see that it will cost you spirit to gain the water biome. When you adjust your spirit, you'll move up or down on this track. If you ever gain more spirit than there is space to hold on this track, any excess is lost, while you are not permitted to take an action which would take you below -8 spirit. In many trails and locations, you'll see one of these icons showing one of the 6 creatures with a sun. This adds one of the corresponding creature pieces into the common market. You'll fill each column from top to bottom and gain the bonus covered. For the first one placed in each column, there is a bonus token that was placed randomly during setup, and you gain the benefit on that bonus token and nothing else. Each subsequent creature placed in a column goes from top to bottom, and you'll gain the spirit and points covered. After placing the creature, advance the sun marker 1 step. That's what the sun icon will remind you to do. This is the timer for the game. The length of the game is going to depend solely on how quickly players add creatures to the market. The foot icon allows you to invite a creature to your board. Choose any one type of creature which is available and take the lowest one from its column. Gain the spirit bonus shown on the right-hand side. Here you can see some more of the economic interplay. You get the best rewards for attracting scarce creatures and inviting plentiful ones. For now, simply place your new creature here. You'll be able to put that into your habitat at the end of your turn. This action lets you gain a new ecosystem card. There are 4 separate decks, separated based on how many biomes are required to complete that card. And with this action, simply take the top card from any pile and place it in an empty slot above your player board. If you have no empty slot, you cannot take this action and cannot discard these cards voluntarily. You may complete at most one of your ecosystem cards as step 3 of each of your turns. Firstly, pay all of the biomes showing on the bottom of the card. Then gain all the rewards printed along the top of the card. Then place the card, still hidden from other players, to the right-hand side of your board. Like the creatures you've invited, you'll have the chance to add them to your habitat after your turn. The other action you can take with cards is to refresh the market. If you choose to do this, take the top card from each of the 4 ecosystem card decks and move it to the bottom of its deck. You must reset either all 4 or none. You can't pick and choose. The next action is to give a gift to a sage. There's only one way to do this on the main board, which is with this action, and it lets you give a gift to any sage. But it's more common to trigger a sage gift as the reward from completing an ecosystem card, and typically this will require you to give the gift to a specific sage. The first time you gift a specific sage, take a gift cube from your player board and place it in that sage's 1 slot. On each subsequent occasion, advance your cube 1 place, and you can gift each sage at most 3 times. Multiple players may gift the same sage or occupy the same slot. The second last space of every one of the 8 clusters of trails relates to gaining benefits from the associated sage. Each sage has 4 benefits printed alongside it, and when you activate this action, you gain a number of those different benefits equal to the number of gifts you've gifted that sage. So here, for example, I would gain any 2 of these 4. This icon, present on the bottommost of each of the 8 sages' benefits, denotes that that benefit is restricted only to your small meeples. That is, in this case, either of these 2 meeples could claim the bottom benefit, but your larger elder could not. Gifting sages is great for engine building, as it gives you an area of focus where you know you'll reap extra benefits for using those trails. Conversely, if you haven't given a gift to a sage, you'll get no extra benefits at all when using its action on the trail. These icons let you train your smaller black and white printed meeples. If you have one of the appropriate meeple types in its reserve, move it down to the supply, ready to be placed. Finally, some actions let you convert a resource. Here, for example, converting a flower to a water. You should treat this as spending one resource and gaining the other, possibly granting you points in step 4 of your turn. And so with that, we've seen all of the steps of your turn, and we've seen all of the different actions. Once your turn is done, place any ecosystem card you completed, and optionally any creatures you invited, into your habitat. Each card will have 6 habitats on it, and they'll be the habitats corresponding to the biomes you paid for the card, with the low-value rock habitat filling any other spots. Creatures will occupy the points adjacent to 4 habitats. When you place an ecosystem card, at least one of the habitats on it must be adjacent to an already placed habitat. That means you can place cards adjacent to each other like so, or you may place it partially overlapping a previously placed card. You may also place it at any orientation. If there's already a creature in play, you can place the card partially underneath an existing creature. However, you are not allowed to place your new card underneath existing cards. You cannot place it so that it completely covers a creature that was already in play. And you cannot place it so that a previously placed card is completely covered. This applies across multiple cards. It would have been legal to place this here, but not then legal to place this one here, as it would completely cover the card underneath. A creature may be placed onto any point which is diagonally adjacent to 4 habitats and is not orthogonally adjacent to another creature. This would be a legal placement. This would not, as it's adjacent to the mushfrog. And this would not be because it's adjacent to only 3 habitats. If you cannot or do not wish to place a creature, move it to the captivity space of your player board. It's not there forever. On any future turn in which you invite at least 1 creature, you may move exactly 1 creature out of captivity to be placed according to the normal rules. All creatures have different placement objectives by which they score, and all scoring occurs at the end of the game, and that's what we'll talk about now. When the sun reaches this space, the end of the game is triggered. The current player takes these 2 stacked sun tokens into their collection. All players, including the player who triggered the end, will now take 2 more turns, and the player with the suns discards 1 at the end of each turn to track this. Now proceed through these 9 steps of final scoring. Firstly, if you have any creatures remaining in captivity, lose 3 spirit for each creature. Then gain or lose points based on which segment of this track your spirit marker finishes in. Next, you'll score points for the 4 season tracks. In each case, total up how many points you get for the raw objective up to a maximum of 8, and then multiply it by your position on the multiplier track. This limit means you cannot gain more than 48 points per track. The remaining 6 steps are to score the 6 different creatures in your habitat. Firstly, each creature which is adjacent to at least 1 water habitat will score double points based on this objective. So keep that in mind as we go through the example. Firstly, each mushfrog is going to score 3 points for each adjacent tree habitat. This one will score 3 times 4 for 12 points. This one 3 times 2 for 6 points. Likewise, antlerworms score 3 points per adjacent coral. So this one will score 3 times 3 is 9, and this one will score 3 times 1 doubled for a total of 6. A grimster will score 2 points for each adjacent flower, and 3 points for each mushfrog, which can be found in a straight line in any direction from that grimster. As such, this one will score 3 times 2 for the flowers and 1 for the mushfrogs, a total of 9. Likewise, a tail cat scores 2 points for adjacent weeds and 3 points for an antlerworm in a straight line. So in this case, 2 for the weeds, 6 for the antlerworms, and doubled for the water, a total of 16. The wise owl scores 2 points for each adjacent mushroom habitat, and 1 point for every 2 gifts that you have given all of the sages on the board in total. So here, if I'd given 7 total gifts, it would be 2 points for the placement and 3 for the gifts, a total of 5. Finally, a spider ant scores 2 points for each adjacent different habitat, and this can include rocks and water. This one is adjacent to 4 habitats for 8 points, and this one is adjacent to 3 different habitats, doubled for the water, a total of 12. The player with the highest score wins. If tied, most creatures wins. If still tied, highest spirit. If still tied, most total steps on the season tracks. And if still tied, victory is shared. And that's how to play Arborea.
Thank you so much for watching. Your like and comments are much appreciated. Subscribe to see what's coming. And hopefully you have a wonderful day. See you next time.